We came into the world together, 2 minutes apart, same hospital room, same parents, same bloodline. But from the very first breath, the world treated us as though we were born into different families entirely. My name is Mara. My twin sister's name is Lauren. And for the first 18 years of my life, Lauren was the sun, and I was the shadow she cast. I want to be careful here, because Lauren is my sister, and no matter what I say about her, there is a part of me that has never stopped loving her. But love doesn't require you to lie, and the truth of my childhood is something I've spent years trying to metabolize, to understand, to put somewhere inside myself where it doesn't fester anymore. Writing this is part of that process. Our parents? Both doctors, third-generation physicians in a family where medicine wasn't just a profession but a dynasty, were not cruel people in the way that cartoon villains are cruel. They didn't lock me in a room or deny me food. The cruelty was subtler than that. It was the kind of cruelty that hides in plain sight, the kind that makes you question your own perception, the kind where if you dared bring it up at the dinner table, someone would laugh and say, "You're being dramatic." Christmas was the calendar date I dreaded most. Every December 25th, I would sit beside Lauren under the tree, and the disparity would reveal itself as clearly as if someone had drawn a line down the center of the living room. Lauren's pile of gifts was always twice the size of mine. And this wasn't a matter of what we asked for, it was a matter of what my parents chose to give. Lauren would unwrap a new laptop, I would unwrap a replacement pencil case. Lauren would get the designer sneakers she'd casually mentioned wanting. I would get a pair from a discount store my mother had clearly grabbed as an afterthought. Lauren would receive gift cards and jewelry and clothes and gadgets, and I would sit there opening my modest pile, maintaining a smile so fixed it ached in my jaw, whispering thank you for things I had never asked for and didn't need. And then there were the just because gifts. The ones that arrived on ordinary Tuesdays for no occasion at all. My mother would come home with a shopping bag and hand it to Lauren, a new top, a bracelet, a bottle of perfume, and Lauren would beam, and that would be that. No shopping bag for me. No explanation. Just the quiet, ambient message that Lauren's happiness was worth spontaneous investment, while mine was an inconvenience. I told myself it didn't matter. Children are extraordinarily resilient when it comes to inventing reasons not to feel pain. I told myself maybe Lauren needed these things more than I did. Maybe I was just less exciting to shop for. Maybe I was imagining it. But I wasn't imagining it, and the part of me that wasn't imagining it grew up very quickly, developing a kind of early self-sufficiency born not from confidence but from necessity. If no one was going to notice what I needed, I was going to learn to take care of myself. The other element of our childhood, the one that hurt even more than the unequal gifts, was the way my parents handled Lauren's behavior. Lauren was spoiled. I say this without judgment, because it wasn't her fault, it was the direct result of being raised to believe she was exempt from consequences. From the time we were small, whenever Lauren got into trouble, she would point at me. I broke the vase. I forgot to lock the car. I ate the leftovers my father had been saving. I cheated on the spelling test. I said the bad word. And our parents, intelligent, educated, professionally accomplished people who made life and death decisions at work every day, would come home and look at Lauren's wide, practiced eyes, and look at me standing in the corner already beginning to protest my innocence, and they would choose Lauren. Every single time. It got so bad that I started keeping a journal when I was about 11. Not a diary of feelings, but a record. Dates, events, outcomes. Things a child should never have to document about her own family. I kept it hidden under the loose floorboard in my closet, and sometimes at night I would take it out and read the entries just to remind myself that I wasn't crazy. That these things had really happened. That I wasn't, as my mother once told me, too sensitive for my own good. The golden child phenomenon is well documented, though I didn't have that language for it back then. What I knew was simpler and sadder, I was not the favorite. And in a family as small as ours, 2 parents, 2 children, not being the favorite meant being, in some essential way, the spare. The extra. The one the family could do without. When we were 17, something began to shift. Lauren discovered parties. Not in the cautious, experimental way that teenagers often discover them. She discovered them with her whole body, like a person who had been waiting her entire life for the permission to be reckless. Every weekend she was out. Fake IDs appeared. Older boys appeared. A certain glassiness around the eyes appeared, and we all pretended not to see it. My parents, to their credit, were concerned. But concern for Lauren always came out sideways, as disappointment, as anxiety, as a kind of theatrical wringing of hands that never translated into actual intervention. They grounded her. She ignored them. They confiscated her phone. She got another one. The dynamic that had always existed, Lauren doing whatever she wanted, consequences arriving and dissolving like smoke, simply continued. And something strange began to happen to me in that period. For the first time in my life, I became interesting to my parents. Not because anything had changed about me. I was the same person I'd always been. Studious, quiet, a little introverted, with a love of flight simulators that had been burning in me since I was 8 years old, and my uncle took me to an air show and I watched a commercial jet bank hard against the sunset sky and felt something open in my chest like a door. I had always wanted to fly. I had always been the kind of person who spent Saturday afternoons reading about thrust-to-weight ratios instead of going to parties. Nothing about me changed. But now my parents could see me. Now I was the one who came home at curfew, who got good grades, who didn't smell like alcohol, who said please and thank you and helped clear the table after dinner. And that adequacy, that basic, ordinary adequacy, began to be treated as extraordinary, simply because Lauren was providing such a dramatic counterpoint. Graduation came. Lauren and I walked across the same stage, collected the same diplomas, wore the same cap and gown. We stood together for photographs and my mother cried, and for a moment it felt like we were the same, like the scales had finally balanced. Then the reality of our futures arrived, and the scales tipped again, this time in the opposite direction. Lauren announced she was not going to university. My parents were devastated. The medical dynasty, the family tradition, the carefully maintained legacy, all of it trembled at this pronouncement. There were arguments. There were long, tense dinners. There was a period of about 2 weeks where my father didn't speak to Lauren at all, which, I noted privately, was longer than he'd ever gone without speaking to me after any of my alleged transgressions. And then my parents turned to me. I had been accepted to a program that would put me on the path to becoming a commercial pilot. It was a rigorous, competitive program that I'd worked toward with a seriousness that had structured my entire adolescence. I was proud of this acceptance in the way you're proud of something that cost you real effort, real sacrifice. When I told my parents, they sat very still. Then my mother said, "But we need a doctor in this family. With your sister not going to medical school, you're all we have." I looked at her across the kitchen table. I thought about the 11 years of journals under the floorboard. I thought about every Christmas morning. I thought about every lie Lauren told and every time I stood in the corner absorbing the punishment for it. And I felt something harden in me, not with anger exactly, but with clarity. "I'm going to be a pilot," I said. The weeks that followed were not pleasant. My parents used every tool available to them: guilt, ultimatums, the specter of the family legacy, the emotional manipulation that well-meaning parents deploy when they mistake their desires for their children's best interests. My father told me I was throwing my life away. My mother cried in a manner that was almost theatrical in its intensity. There was a family dinner where my grandparents weighed in, and my aunt who was also a doctor weighed in, and I sat at that table surrounded by people who loved me in their way and yet were utterly incapable of seeing me as a person rather than a vehicle for their ambitions. I had already researched apartments. I had already figured out how much I would need to earn to survive while completing my training. I had already built the escape route, in the quiet, methodical way that I had always done the important things in my life, carefully, thoroughly, and mostly alone. The cheapest apartment I could find was in a neighborhood that would have made my mother physically ill if she'd seen it. The building had a broken intercom and a landlord who communicated exclusively through terse, misspelled text messages. My neighbors included a man who played bass-heavy music until 2 in the morning and a woman who kept what appeared to be an illegal number of cats. The walls were thin. The radiator knocked and hissed through the night like something alive and resentful. I loved it. I loved it with the fierce, almost desperate love of someone who has finally escaped. It was mine. Just mine. No one was coming home to that apartment to tell me I had done something wrong. No Lauren to blame me. No parents to misinterpret me. No legacy to suffocate me. I worked 2 jobs that first year. A coffee shop in the mornings, a grocery store in the evenings, and flight training in between. I was exhausted in a way that was almost physical in its texture, a bone-deep tiredness that I wore like a garment. But beneath the exhaustion was something I hadn't felt in 18 years of living in my family home, the profound, uncomplicated piece of a life that was simply and entirely my own. I stopped calling home after a while. At first it was because I was too tired and too busy. Then it became a choice. The silence from their end was deafening at first, and then it became normal, and then it became something I no longer noticed. The wound of my childhood didn't disappear. Wounds like that don't, not really, but it stopped actively bleeding. 7 years is a long time. 7 years ago I was a 25-year-old woman sleeping on a second-hand mattress in a neighborhood my mother would have described using language she was too refined to normally employ. I was counting every dollar, rationing my groceries, studying until my eyes burned, lying awake listening to the man upstairs and thinking you can do this, you can do this, you can do this like a prayer without a deity. 7 years later, I was a pilot. I want you to understand what that means, not the glamorous Hollywood version of it, but the real thing. The thousands of hours of training. The simulator sessions that humbled me so completely I had to sit alone in my car afterward and remind myself why I had wanted this. The exams. The physical assessments. The licensing bureaucracy that is extensive enough to make a person genuinely question their dedication to the profession. The years of flying smaller aircraft, building hours, proving myself to people who took a long time to see the woman in the cockpit as anything other than a novelty. But I did it. I moved through all of it, year by year, and I came out the other side. I now live in a city far enough from my hometown that running into my family at the grocery store is not a thing I need to worry about. It's a city that suits me, big enough to be anonymous when I need anonymity, small enough to feel like a community. I have friends there, colleagues, a life assembled with intention and care out of the raw materials of everything I'd had to leave behind. And I have Daniel. I met Daniel at a charity event that a colleague dragged me to about 3 years ago. I almost didn't go. I'd had a long week of flights and I was tired, and the last thing I wanted was a room full of people making small talk over expensive canapés. But I went, because my colleague was persuasive, and because some part of me has always known that the moments you almost skip are sometimes the ones that matter most. Daniel was standing near the bar looking as uncomfortable as I felt, which was immediately endearing. He had a glass of wine he didn't seem to be drinking and a slightly pained expression that I later learned meant he was doing the internal calculus of how soon he could leave without being rude. We got to talking. We talked until the event ended and the venue staff started giving us pointed looks. We moved to a different bar and kept talking. At 2 in the morning we were still talking on a park bench outside, and I was wrapping my coat tighter against the night air thinking, oh, here is a person who makes sense to me. He is from money. This is just a fact about him the way that other things are facts about other people. His family has been wealthy for generations, not ostentatiously, not in a way that he wears like a costume, but in the way that old money often manifests. In a certain ease of manner, in a comfort with the world, in the absence of financial anxiety that most people carry like background noise. He works. He's actually extraordinarily hardworking, which surprised me when I first learned it, and then stopped surprising me when I understood that work, for Daniel, is not about survival but about meaning. He's in finance. He's good at it. He's also gentle and funny and deeply, consistently kind in the way that only people who have genuine security can be kind, without scarcity driving the gesture. I did not fall in love with him because of his family's wealth. I want to be absolutely clear about this, because the story I am about to tell you requires that you understand it. His money was never part of the calculation for me. After a childhood where I was made to feel like a burden, where my needs were subordinate to my sister's comfort, where I was expected to disappear into someone else's vision of my future, the last thing I wanted was to be financially dependent on anyone. I had built my independence cell by cell over 7 brutal years, and I was proud of it. Daniel's money was his. My income was mine. This was not a point of contention between us, it was one of the foundations of our partnership. 2 months ago, Daniel proposed. We were at home. Not at a restaurant, not at some scenic overlook, not with a photographer hidden in the bushes, just at home, in our kitchen, after a dinner we'd cooked together. He had made dessert, which he almost never does, and when I looked up from the chocolate cake he'd somehow produced, he was holding a ring and looking at me with an expression I will carry in my memory for the rest of my life. It was so quietly certain. Not dramatic. Just true. I said yes before he finished the sentence. And then, 3 weeks after the engagement, I sat on the edge of our bathtub looking at a positive pregnancy test, and I cried, not from fear, not from panic, but from a deep, welling gratitude that felt almost spiritual. This was the family I was going to have. The one I was going to build right, from scratch, with everything I'd learned from the family I'd survived. We announced it on social media because we were happy and we wanted to be happy out loud. Which is when my mother found me. The text came on a Thursday. I was between flights, sitting in the crew lounge with a coffee going cold in my hands, and I felt my old phone. I'd kept the number out of some residual attachment I hadn't fully examined, buzz against my thigh. It's Mom. I saw you're engaged and pregnant. Congratulations. I'd love to meet and catch up. It's been too long. I sat with this message for a long time. 7 years is long enough to heal, long enough to build perspective, long enough to forgive in the abstract way where you release the bitterness without excusing the behavior. And I had done that work. Mostly. I'd had therapy. I understood my parents' limitations, the generational patterns, the way their own upbringings had shaped their blind spots. I didn't hate them. But I also knew my mother. And the text had a particular texture to it that I recognized the way you recognize a smell from your childhood, immediately, viscerally, before you've had time to think about it. Still. 7 years. People change. I had changed enormously. Maybe she had too. I agreed to meet her at a cafe near the city center. Neutral ground. Public space. I dressed carefully that morning, not to impress her, but to armor myself. The professional, put-together woman I had become was partly genuine and partly a set of tools I had learned to deploy in situations that required me to feel more protected than I actually was. She was already there when I arrived. She looked older. Of course she did, 7 years, and our father's illness, and everything else. But she was still unmistakably my mother. Impeccably dressed, posture like a finishing school graduate, eyes that assessed a room before she allowed herself to inhabit it. She stood when she saw me and we embraced with the careful formality of two people who once knew each other very well and are no longer sure what they know. We ordered coffee. We made the small talk that estranged family members make. You look wonderful, the city is beautiful, how is the flying going? With the mutual knowledge that this was not what we were there to discuss, sitting between us like a third person at the table. She asked about Daniel. More specifically than I'd expected. I answered in general terms. She asked whether he came from a good family. I said yes. She nodded in a way that was slightly too satisfied. Then she began to talk. My father's cancer diagnosis came first. She delivered it with the precision of someone who has learned that the right information, delivered in the right order, produces the desired effect. He had been diagnosed 2 years ago. The treatment was ongoing. It was expensive. Lauren came next. Lauren, who was now 25 and the mother of a 4-year-old. Lauren, who had lost her job. Lauren, who had subsequently lost the ability to pay her rent. Lauren, who had moved back home with her child, which was why they needed more space, which was why a bigger house had become a necessity. My mother looked at me across the cafe table with an expression I can only describe as rehearsed vulnerability, the performance of need from a woman who had always had too much pride to genuinely express it. And then she said, I know that Daniel's family is wealthy. I thought, given everything, you might be willing to help us. We need money for a bigger house, and the medical bills are considerable. You could speak to Daniel. The room did not go quiet around me. The cafe continued its ordinary life, milk steaming, spoons clinking, someone at the next table laughing at something on their phone. The world kept moving. I looked at my mother. I looked at this woman who had stood in the kitchen of my childhood home and told me I was too sensitive. This woman who had watched Lauren unwrap laptop after laptop on Christmas morning and handed me a pencil case. This woman who had looked me in the eyes and said you have to become a doctor because your sister won't, as if I were a backup plan rather than a human being with my own dreams. I won't be doing that, I said. Her face changed. The rehearsed vulnerability dropped away like a mask, and beneath it was the expression I remembered better, the one that meant someone was about to make me feel very small. She called me selfish. She called me ungrateful. She invoked my father's illness in a way that was designed to be weaponizing and mostly was. She reminded me that family is family, that blood is blood, that there are obligations that transcend personal grievances. She said the word grievances in a tone that suggested my reasons were petty, small, the emotional responses of a child who needed to get over herself. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry, though the edges of my eyes burned. I said, very clearly. The money you're asking for is Daniel's money. Not mine. It's not mine to give, and even if it were, the answer would still be no. She left. She left money on the table for the coffees, which was so precisely her, maintaining the appearance of dignity while withdrawing the substance of it, and she left without looking back. Within 48 hours, my phone had received texts and calls from 14 separate family members. I know because I counted. There was an aunt who told me I was breaking my father's heart. There was a cousin who lectured me about family loyalty in a voice message that lasted 7 minutes. There was my grandmother, my father's mother, 91 years old and still formidably sharp, who sent me a text so devastating in its clarity that I actually had to sit down. There was a family WhatsApp group I had apparently been added to without my knowledge, from which my phone downloaded 312 messages in the space of an afternoon, the majority of which were about me. The narrative they had constructed was tidy and coherent. I was a selfish woman who had married into wealth, though Daniel and I were not yet married. Who had abandoned my family in their time of need, who prioritized luxury and personal happiness over the sacred bonds of blood. Several messages noted that my father might not have much time left. Several others brought up Lauren's child, my niece or nephew, a 4-year-old I had never met, as evidence of my moral failure. Not one message acknowledged the childhood I had lived in. Not one message said, "We understand why you might be hesitant. We know there are things that happened that made this complicated." Not one message offered what I had needed from these people for 25 years, the simple, basic recognition that my experience had been real. I turned my phone off. I made myself a cup of tea, sat on the window seat in our apartment, and watched the street below. A woman walked a dog. A kid on a bike cut too close to the curb and wobbled, then corrected. The light was that particular quality of late afternoon light that makes everything look like it's been filtered through amber. Daniel came home and found me there. He sat beside me and read the messages I'd screenshotted before silencing my phone, and when he finished he put the phone down and took my hand. "We don't owe them anything," he said. "I know," I said. "But you're still thinking about it." "I'm thinking about my father," I said. "He's sick." "Whatever happened between us, he's my father and he's sick and that's real." Daniel nodded. "He's smart enough not to make these calculations for me, wise enough to understand that there's a difference between what someone deserves and what someone might need." But as I sat there, turning the question over in the way you turn a stone in your hand to feel its weight, I kept coming back to the same thing. My mother had not come to that cafe to reconcile. She had come because she saw a photograph of me looking happy beside a man who appeared to have money, and she had done the math. The conversation we had not had, the one about my childhood, about what I had been put through, about the years of being blamed and dismissed and treated as less than, she had not initiated that conversation. She had not said "I'm sorry." She had not said "I've been thinking about how we treated you and I want to make it right." She had gone straight to the ask, dressed up in just enough family news to make it feel like something other than what it was. If she had come to me differently, if she had come with genuine remorse, with an acknowledgement of the past, with a relationship she was trying to rebuild rather than a transaction she was trying to complete, everything might have been different. I am not a vindictive person. I have never wanted my family to suffer. But she had not come to me as a mother. She had come to me as a creditor. And I am no one's debt. There is a question underneath the one my family thinks they're asking. The question they think they're asking is, "Will you give us money?" The question they are actually asking is, "Do you owe us?" And the answer to that question is one I have spent a great deal of time examining. My parents gave me life. They provided food and shelter and education. They were not abusive in the technical sense. They did not intend, I think, to create the childhood they created. Favoritism rarely comes from malice, it comes from preference, and preference comes from places its owners don't always understand. My father probably didn't know why Lauren's face lit something in him that mine didn't. My mother probably didn't think of herself as cruel on those Christmas mornings. I have tried to extend them this grace, and I believe I have mostly succeeded. But grace is not the same as obligation. Understanding why someone hurt you does not mean you are required to rescue them from the consequences of their own choices. My parents had money. They made decisions about that money. Those decisions did not include preparing for the future with the seriousness the future required. That is not my responsibility. My mother's phone call was not a bill presented to me for the debt of my childhood care, it was a demand rooted in the assumption that I owed them something I had never agreed to owe. And the argument about Daniel's money is almost too obvious to engage with. Daniel's money is Daniel's money. We are partners. We will build a life together, and that life will involve the sharing of resources in ways we decide on together. But the idea that I can simply reach into the wealth of my fiancé's family and redistribute it to mine. The idea that Daniel's success is a pool I can draw from on behalf of people he has never met, people who did not treat me well, people who are asking not through a relationship of mutual care but through the mechanism of guilt and social pressure. This is not how partnerships work. It's not how respect works. It's not how anything works. Lauren is also in this story. Lauren, who was handed everything and still arrived at 31 broke, unemployed, the mother of a child she is apparently not able to support, living in the home of parents who are themselves struggling. I feel compassion for this, because I do. The party lifestyle Lauren chose was partly a response to being given too much too easily, which is its own kind of parental failure. She was not set up well by the same people who didn't set me up well, she was set up differently badly. But she is an adult. She is my age. And her situation is not a debt I hold. My niece or nephew, though, the child I've never met. That one is harder. A 4-year-old didn't choose any of this. A 4-year-old is just a 4-year-old. I have thought about this for weeks now. I have thought about it in the particular kind of sustained, low-level way that important things get thought about. Not at a desk with a notepad, but in the shower, in the cockpit during long stretches of clear sky, in the half-awake hours before the alarm. And what I've arrived at is this: if there ever comes a day when my niece or nephew needs something that I can provide, and they ask me for it directly, I will do what I can. Not because of my family. Because of them. Because a child is a person who deserves to be seen, and I know better than anyone what it costs when they are not. But that is a different thing from writing a check to my mother to use as she sees fit. I am 25 weeks pregnant now as I write this. The baby moves at night, and sometimes Daniel puts his hand on my stomach and goes very still, listening, as if the movement is a language he is trying to learn. We have talked about the kind of parents we want to be. These conversations have a weight to them that most conversations don't. The weight of everything we are deliberately turning away from, the patterns we are consciously refusing to repeat. We will not have favorites. We will believe our child when they tell us something happened. We will not tell them their feelings are too big or their needs are inconvenient. We will not make them earn our attention by excelling, or lose it by being human. I am aware that parenting is a humbling project that routinely defeats even the most earnest intentions, and I hold no illusions about doing it perfectly. But the values we're building from equity, presence, the genuine, effortful work of seeing the person your child actually is, these feel solid in a way that I trust. My phone is on again. I haven't heard from my family in some weeks, which I'm choosing to interpret as the conversation having reached a natural conclusion rather than as a gathering storm. Maybe I'm right. Maybe I'm wrong. Either way, I know what my answer is, and it hasn't changed. There will be people who read this and call me hard-hearted. There will be people who invoke my father's cancer and ask how I can sleep at night. There will be people who argue that whatever happened in my childhood, I have a duty to my blood that transcends it. I understand all of these positions. I don't share them. The family I came from taught me one thing with absolute clarity: love is not a guarantee. Blood is not a guarantee. Proximity and shared history are not guarantees. What makes a family, what actually makes it, in the operational, daily, lived sense, is the ongoing choice to see each other and show up for each other and treat each other as worthy of care. My family made a different choice for 18 years. I made a different choice for 7. Now I am building something new.